not afraid, and that was in the New York Times. And so I said, now I'm really in trouble because then they interviewed me. But it was a month later, I went and did my visa, and they gave me the visa. But in the end, the last 2 years, they made my wife come in for the visa interview with me. And they took us to a back room. It was like an interrogation room. We had to sit down, remember? And they asked us questions saying, what are you doing here? Are you working? And they knew stuff. They'd say to me, oh, is Miss Lee still your driver? And I said, oh no, she quit like 3-4 years ago. But what they were telling me is, we know about you, and that was the kind of pressure. And even like the real heroes up in Beijing are the Chinese news assistants. Every news organization has a Chinese news assistant, and they're the ones that do a lot of the work. I mean, they find stories, they call up people on the phone, they do interviews on the phone, and so the government puts pressure on them, and so the Guan or Guoba people will call them up and say, meet me at McDonald's. And then they go down, and then they talk to them, and they go like, oh, we hear that your mother was just in the hospital. And oh, we hear that your brother didn't do well on the land college, And it scares Chinese people because it's like saying, oh, they know about me. They know about my mother, they know about my father, and it frightens people. Now with foreigners, it doesn't work that well. But I think with them, they're just saying, they want me to know that they know what I'm doing and where I am and stuff. But I was upset because why should my wife have to be interrogated like a criminal like that, And I said to them, I said, why does she have to come? I'm the journalist, not her. And they go like, oh, because we said so, So you can't argue with them. It's it's their basketball court and their basketball.
So for the news assistant, they're being threatened by with
All the time. They get.
What was the best response you say?
Oh, what they'll say is that, okay, we're all Chinese people. You have to, defend the motherland. And if your boss goes any place, you have to call us and tell us where he's going. And we want to know what stories he's doing, and so you should call us all the time and tell us everything that's going on. I don't know all of them, but a lot of the assistants, they're super upright people, and they go like, oh yeah, okay, I'll do it, and then they don't do it. And they know that, I think the news assistants, a lot of them know they can get it. But a New York Times news assistant went to jail for 3 years, a couple of years ago. It was around the time, I think, that Jiang Zemin stepped down, and they had some kind of information nobody else had, and they were sure that it was the Chinese news assistant at the New York Times, and he got arrested for sharing state secrets or something like that. So it's kind of scary. So I think that I always have a lot of respect for the news assistants. Because for me, I get in trouble, they'll just, at the worst, they'll kick me out. But if I'm Chinese, you go to jail. And then one news assistant I know, her mother was practicing Falun Gong, but she was doing it very quietly in her house, and they arrested the mother and put her in jail. And I always wondered, was that a way to kind of get back at her? Because she wasn't like kind of protesting, she wasn't going to Tiananmen, she like did it in her house, but they found some kind of Falun Gong material on her when she left the house. And they sent her, it was like a 58-year-old housewife, she doesn't deserve to go to jail.
Did you compare notes with Melissa Chen, because she was also denied?
Yeah, she was denied.
Her case versus your case?
Yeah, very similar. She was still in China and I had left. I think they were making scapegoats, do this to scare the other reporters, And but Melissa did a lot of the same kind of stories I did, she did the house jails and things like that. And Melissa's a bit younger, and I knew, because I've been a journalist for over 30 years, you just don't make a big deal, So if the police kind of hassle me, oh, they were just sorry, and you're okay, But Melissa was young, and she would like start fighting with them and yelling and stuff.
More aggressive than you, because she's trying to approach people that are position, right?
Oh yeah. Well, I did the same thing. I met those people too. So, but she was in their face a bit, and I kind of figured I'm not Chinese. They're in charge here, so I have to kind of do what they say, So.
We're running out of time. So this is the question that has been on my mind for a while. Sometimes when I read this foreign coverage of China,
right,
especially China's top politics, you have the information and sources that no other Chinese press ever get. So sometimes the information is so confidential that it's just very shocking to a lot of people. So the speculation is that some people at the top of China's government's community workings, they deliberately leaked those information to foreign press press
Yeah.
as a way to attack their
Enemies.
political
Yeah,
enemies
yeah.
in the government. So
Right.
can you confirm, I mean, based on your experience of what you've heard in your circle,
You know,
is that something you can confirm?
yeah, I can't personally, I never had that kind of contact. You know, I always worked for kind of second-tier newspapers and magazines, and it was more like the New York Times or the London Times would get those opportunities, I think. If somebody wants to leak something, they're going to go to the biggest circulation, you know. So, but I've heard, I mean, I know friends have gotten things, and it had to come from some senior official. I also know a story that there was a reporter at the Guangming Ribao, and his father used to be like one of the top editors at Renmin Ribao, and he was friends with a lot of the like Hong Kong and Taiwan reporters. And then one day, we used to go to have dinner with him. He was a very nice guy, knew a lot, and one day we heard he got arrested. And a friend of mine from the Philippines called up his wife and said, "Oh, what happened?" And she said, they gave him fake information. They suspected he was leaking information, so they gave him fake information that wasn't true. And then when it was reported, he was the only one that knew it. So he got arrested and went to jail for like 2 years, I think. Yeah.
Chinese man?
Chinese, yeah. And somebody from like a connected family, you know. And they're very sad, yeah.
How do you see Peter Hessler's work? His reporting style is slightly different from the mainstream.
Yeah, I think his is much of Pete Hessler. You know, his real focus is creative writing. So the writing that he did was less political. Most of it was about, you know, he was an English teacher in Sichuan province. The first book, Rivertown, was about that. And then he did a book of essays on like people he met, Oracle Bones. So his thing was more like creative writing and looking at society, that kind of thing. Peter didn't write much about politics, and none of his books were about politics. So he had a different, and he worked for the New Yorker. And the New Yorker, they're not doing day-to-day news. So he could kind of say, okay, I'll do this story, I'll do that story. So it was a different style. Yeah. He studied creative writing at Princeton, and that's his specialty.
A lot of you have left, so you left.
Yeah.
David, Barbo's not left.
I'm not sure they leave, yeah.
Yeah, everyone
Everyone just left, yeah.
And many others.
Yeah.
And even Osnos.
Osnos left a couple of years
Yes,
ago.
so-
Yeah, and also Andrew Jacobs left.
Yes.
You know, yeah, because these are people, I mean, I got there in 1994. Most people would come for 3 to 5 years. That was the average, about 3 to 5 years. You know, so but most of the people that were there when I was there, they left. Yeah.
So what do you think of the coverage today now?
Yeah, there's still good people. There's a guy named Tom Phillips from The Guardian. He was quite good. He did good stories. Ian Johnson focuses more on religion and intellectuals. He's done very good stories. I met him he was in China in 1994. And that's when I first met him. He left for a couple of years. And so there's quite a few people that are actually quite good journalists. They're better than they were. If you went back 30 years ago, none of the China journalists spoke Chinese. And now it's quite common for people to come for the New York Times that have already had 3 years of Chinese or actually studied in China before. So I think that there's a better quality of journalists now and than there was, say, when I first got to Beijing. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah.
So basically, like now you can upload your photos, like your reporting,
Yeah.
right, on the
Yeah.
cloud. So
Yeah.
you don't have to fear like it is tear apart by those police,
I
right?
don't have to fear it's what?
Like it is stolen by police.
No.
Right. So as long as you record it, it will upload
Yeah.
immediately.
And when I was traveling, like for example, I was in that village in south of Changsha. The photos I had were very important. As soon as I got out of the
Cloud.
into the thing, I got on my computer and I had a Wi-Fi stick. I immediately put my photos into the cloud, and some people carried fake notes. You know, and so you'd have a notebook you just scribbled in. And so if the police stopped you, where's your notebook? Okay, here it is. But it was just scribbled, so there was nothing in it, you know. And so people found ways. Before 2008, we couldn't, if we went to a certain town, we didn't have permission, it was some sensitive story, the police would come right to the hotel and get you. So you knew you'd get caught. So people would go to a sauna and sleep in the sauna, you know, because you don't have to give your passport when you go to like a steam bath, like a massage place. You know,
so
and you can
now-
sleep there, and you never use your passport, and then the next day you get up and you leave, you know, so. And a lot of times we went one day and then move, you know, always kind of keep moving, so, you know, always nervous about getting caught, yeah.
How's your communication with your headquarters back outside the Great Firewall?
In what way, in what way?
What, did you have any smooth communication? Do you go through VPN or?
Yeah, I use the VPN, but I use the VPN mainly to get online, because so many websites are blocked, you know, and I wouldn't be able to access, you know, so many websites are blocked. Even American university websites are blocked if they have some kind of sensitive pages there. So I had a VPN the whole time. And occasionally the VPN would go out for a couple hours or a day, but they always fix it pretty quick. But it's gotten far worse now. I mean, they're really cracking down much harder. But in terms of communications, no problem. And nobody ever stopped me from sending a story out. You know, there was no, they never tried to censor us in that way. You know, they would try to get your photos from your camera, and they would try to take your notes. But if you sent a story, I never heard of anyone saying my story was caught in midair or that kind of. Yeah. Shoot. What? Okay. Well, yeah. What?
Oh,
yeah.
so thank you for the report for the people get suffered in China over the years. So for now, under the current political environment, do you think is it possible for journalists in China to report the social problem and to the outside world? And also, with all this technology, is there anything to get around the restriction?
Yeah.
Is it possible at all?
Yeah, I don't think people are intimidated. They're still doing the same stories, and the internet has made things a lot easier. And so, for example, I forget the name of the place, but I think it was 2012. There was a big protest. It was in Sichuan over a Wuhan, yeah. And so normally, if it was 10 years earlier or 5 years earlier, we would never even know what happened there. But because of the internet, all of a sudden we started seeing pictures of people being beat up, people with blood, you know, police attacking people. It was all on the internet. And you know who was doing it? Middle school students. Middle school students, like 13, 14 years old, were sending this stuff out. They knew how to use social media. And a lot of foreign reporters went down to Wuhan and for that reason. So we learned about a lot more things now because social media. Even now, there are farmers in China. I don't know how they found me, but they got my Skype address or they got my Facebook page, and they say, oh, so many people were arrested here today, or this happened there today, or this person, you know, got beat up. So I get it even now from people on the social media. They still kind of reach out. So in some ways, you know, we thought the internet was going to save China, was going to, you know, and it didn't. And but in a lot of ways, they can't control what's happening, you know. And so, and even like when Gao Zhisheng, I'm sorry. Chen Guangcheng, when he was in the hospital in Beijing, and the U.S. Embassy people just like deserted, he was there by himself, and then Chinese officials go in there trying to talk to him. He was tweeting with Teng Biao, and he was saying, okay, here's what's happened, what should I do? And they're asking me questions, and the Americans left, and all the reporters were watching this, and I was like translating, on Facebook, I was translating everything that he and Teng Biao said, and so other reporters saw it, you know, so it kind of gets out more. A couple of weeks ago, something happened, and somebody notified me, and I said, I can't write about it now, but I put it on Facebook. And 4 or 5 journalists called me up and said, it was the arrest of Uyghur students in Egypt. You know, a bunch of Uyghur students in Egypt were arrested and sent back to China. And so some Uyghur students contacted me on Twitter and said, oh, people are being arrested and they're being forced to go back to China. And so I started, you know, put on Facebook and Twitter, and about 4 or 5 journalists called me up, and I could put them in touch with Uyghurs who spoke English, who could, like, they could interview them so they could actually do a story. And so you can see how this kind of impacts things. So now whenever I hear about something, if I can't do it because I'm busy, I just kind of tell friends or put it on Facebook or I put it on Twitter. Yeah. You have one question? Just one more? Yeah.
So I heard some criticism to foreign journalists in China. Let's say you guys reporting is focused too much on the negative side.
Right.
From the news, like we see on the mainstream English media about China, China seems to collapse in like 6 months.
Right.
But yet over like 10 years past, China is still not collapsing.
Right.
It's still doing very well.
Right.
So we are kind of being misled by the
with the foreign journalists reporting.
Yeah, I don't think that it's misleading. I mean, you get, for every negative story, you can find some story about booming China. You know, I've written stories about Benetton car shows in the SciTech building. You know, we also do positive stories, but the people only kind of pay attention to the negative things. That's what arouses a lot of attention. And I don't think any journalists are predicting it's going to fail. I mean, Gordon Chang, he wrote a book called The Coming Collapse of China about 15 years ago. So he gets in a lot of, people tease him all the time, so China hasn't collapsed yet, you know. Yeah, I don't know.
What's your take? Do you think it's going to collapse, or is it going to last just like this?
I don't think it's going to collapse suddenly, but I think there's a limit to how long it can go. Because I think there are too many problems in society, and I think there are a lot of economic problems, a lot of bad bank loans. They're still getting most of the money to the state enterprises, and it's the private sector that's really efficient. So I think there's a limit to how long. And you know, it's like if the China Quarterly, it's like the top academic magazine about China. They recently censored this magazine in China. You know, if you don't allow people, they say, we're going to make 100 excellent movies. They said that. We're going to make 100 world-class movies in 5 years. You can't do it that way. If John Yimou and all these different directors can't produce their movies in China, how is it going to get success? You have to have success. But if you're going to block even movies and things, people don't get a chance to kind of grow and so it's just this movie. It's fiction, it's novels, everything. If you can't write books, and that's what I think is the biggest problem now. You know, it's you can't. Yeah. So I don't know. I mean, at the same token, everyone said, "Oh, once China becomes economically strong, then human rights will come." That hasn't happened either. Well, Well, many people said, "Oh, once you have a strong economy, then human rights, democracy will follow." But it didn't happen in Singapore, and it hasn't happened in China. So all the people that say, okay, so maybe I'm on the China collapse side, well, it hasn't collapsed. But these other people saying, oh, it's going to be a superpower, well, it hasn't become a superpower yet either, And so I think, there's a lot of problems, but you can't discuss things, and I think that's a big problem, and the education system. It's like I have a friend of mine who's taught finance at Beidou for many, 10 years. And he says the students are his Chinese students are amazing. They're wonderful, really good, smart students, but the university is failing them. The university is not doing a good job of teaching. You've got to take Marxism and these courses. And I remember if you wanted to go to, Hui Fang told me he couldn't get students into his advanced law degree program because they had to pass the English exam.
Yeah.
And there were students that were quite good law students, but because they couldn't get a high enough score in the English, they're finished. And who was the famous art teacher? Chen Dongmin? Same thing. He couldn't get any art students to a PhD class because the art students weren't good in English. So how do you get a great country if you keep your people down? If a country that keeps their people suppressed is never going to become a truly great company. And the Communist Party thinks, oh, we'll just set a number. It's not like making bridges or building buildings. We're going to make 100 excellent movies. It doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way. You need to have creativity and stuff. And creativity affects everything. It affects everything.
Can I ask one more question?
Okay, we're going to ask a question. Okay.
Oh, okay. Professionally, how do you view your competitors, such as Russia, Time and CGT and Xinhua News? Do you think that's just propaganda machine?
The Chinese?
The Russians and also the Chinese.
Oh,
their media.
Yeah, the same media is propaganda. It's Global Times. I get angry. My blood pressure goes over. I read the Global Times. But I would say there are many good Chinese journalists around. At the whole Nanfang Zhongmu, Nanfang Renwu Zhoukan, all of the Nanfang magazines, newspapers are quite good. I used to read them every week. And then also Caixin, the economic magazine is quite good. And I used to get ideas, from these. And also like the Nanfang Zhongmu, when I first got to China, I read it every week, every Thursday. So I couldn't wait to read it. I get good stories. It was interesting. And then 6 months later, Nanfang Zhongmu would get into trouble. and the editor would be arrested or he'd be fired. And all my Chinese friends said, Nafang was no good anymore. And for like 2 months, nothing. And then all of a sudden, 6 months later, Nafang is like doing really good stories again, you know? And so for 15 years, 20 years, I've been hearing Nafang was not good anymore, but then it always kind of seems to bounce back. And you know, I read there were a lot of investigative journals in China. A bunch of them quit because the pressure was so great on them, but they did good stories. And a couple of years ago, there was a Chinese reporter, I forgot her name, and she said, it was around a time when there was a Chinese guy who tried to explode himself in the airport. Do you remember that? It was a handicapped guy in a wheelchair, and he had a small bomb, and he set it off at the airport in Beijing. And she wrote an article that was published in a Chinese magazine, and it was called Why I Sympathize with the Airport Bomber. And she talked about how being a reporter over the years, she'd done so many, and she'd actually interviewed the same guy like 5 years earlier. Interviewed so many people like this, and they have no way out. You know, they have a problem. It's health, it's education, it's political, and there's no one that can help them, and they keep trying and trying, and eventually they explode. They do something crazy. And she said, so many times she felt bad because she'd interview someone, and they'd think, well, this is going to maybe change things, and it never changed things. You know? And so, you know, I was really moved when I read her article because I could relate to it. You know, it was like everything she described me were things that I had felt. You know, and so yeah, there are a lot of good Chinese reporters, and I tried to befriend people like that, and they helped me a lot. You know, and I just think, you know, it's too bad that they, you know, the best ones. You know, right now, what was it? Changping is someplace. He's in Germany, I think. You know. Even Liu Yu, the writer, he's in Germany. So many of these people have had to leave China. Wu Rongxue is in constant trouble. You know, so all of these people, you know, they worry all the time. You know, about every 6 months, I get in contact with Wu Rongxue and he says, oh, they're following me around. I think I'm going to be arrested. And I've actually tried to get him to come to the U.S., but he won't leave. So there's a lot of, I mean, it's just like really great people. I think a lot of the lawyers, Gao Zhisheng, you know, Tong Biao, and you know, all these guys, they're all just kind of great people. They sacrifice a lot. They don't get anything special in return for it, you know, but they want China to be a better place, you know.
那我们今天活动到此结束，我们很感谢鲍文的接受。然后接下来会有聚餐，如果大家有什么